Okay, my name is Art Smalley, president of a company called Art of Lean. It's very simple. My name is Art. I do lean manufacturing, so Art of Lean, okay? I'm going to talk about 4 types of problems. It's the book I most recently authored, and it's been published now in Portuguese. I want to thank you again for your sponsorship of that book and getting it into the Portuguese language. I'm very flattered and honored. So I'm going to try in about 40 minutes to talk about the 4 types of problems. 10 minutes type 1, 10 minutes type 2, 10 minutes type 3, 10 minutes type 4, and then get your reactions and questions to that. Okay. So a little background first, though, especially for those who might watch this on the webinar later in time. My background's a little different. I'm an American, but I worked for a decade in Japan. I lived in Japan for college years and also for my first job experience in Japan. And I worked for a famous place. The Kamigo engine plant was where Taiichi Ono was the founding plant manager, and a lot of Toyota production systems or lean methodology thinking was developed and proven out there in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I left Japan after a decade and came back to the States. I was a director of improvement for a company called Donnelly Corporation, and we were not a very strong performer, sadly, in the automotive industry. We're fairly weak, but a good workforce and a good management team. And over a 5-year period, that company radically improved. And we were recognized in books and magazine articles and a variety of conferences. And I went into big consulting for a while, McKinsey & Company, a big strategic consulting company for a while, but it wasn't personally that good of a fit for me in hindsight. And in 2003, I started my own company, Art of Lean. And primarily, I help clients, I help customers in various sectors, as diverse as, well, there's a picture of me at Timken Aerospace on their bearing production line. I also help national laboratories. I get lots of calls from service and healthcare organizations in a variety of different places. I speak at conferences and I write books. Primarily, I talk a lot about problem solving. I mean, the lean is a big thing. Can't talk about it in 40 minutes. There's some books and things I can recommend, but the easiest part to talk about today is just the problem solving component. There is a framework that my friends at the Lean Enterprise Institute use. They call it their transformation framework. And at the top of it, it asks what's seemingly a very simple question. You know, what value-driven purpose do you have? What value are you creating for your customer? What problem are you solving? What is your purpose for existing as a company? And specifically, you know, what problem are you trying to solve? And at first glance, it does sound pretty simple. What problem are we solving? But the more you think about that, it's actually a complex question with many levels to it. What's it mean for the person on the front line of an organization, in an IT help desk, for example? What does it mean for a person in purchasing? You know, what does it mean for a person in HR? What's it mean for engineering? What's it mean for an executive manager? You know, there's different levels to an organization and different types of problems we have to face. I started studying the history of problem solving, buying books and manuscripts and everything I could find. And I spent about 5 years researching the topic and thinking about it. I built a bookshelf about as big as this wall, full of just books on problem solving. A lot of them weren't available on Kindle, unfortunately. They were old. And the more I studied it, the more I realized there's no one person who created problem solving, obviously. You can go back to the Greeks if you want and think about their theories and proofs. You can go all the way to the scientific method and think about discoveries and inductive methods and scientific experiments. But the notion of steps and problem solving didn't really show up until about the mid-1950s. There were earlier forms, things like the Pareto concept, control charts, scientific management principles. And some things we can interpret as step-like, but the notion of step-based problem solving really took off in the 1950s in Japan, United States, and a few places, okay? And it's proliferated in many ways and continued to grow and expand ever since then. And this chart I have in front of me is barely the tip of the iceberg. It's just some of the high water points. The more you search, the more you find, and the more people you contributed to the topic. And I started thinking about, is there a logical way to organize this? One size does not fit all. I do not believe in just one style of problem solving. And I think that's a mistake. But also, I don't believe in 10 or 100 ways of problem solving. Okay, that's just too many and too confusing. So after thinking about it for a long time, I organized it into 4 types. Now, you may disagree, okay, because there is no scientific fact-based evidence behind this. It is just somewhat of the psychology of how humans think and the way I view people organizing things. And if you say there's 2 or 5, I probably won't strongly disagree, but I think there's 4, and I'll ask your reaction at the end. There are some behavioral influences. I'm going to skip that slide for right now. In Q&A, if it comes up, I'll explain why also from a psychology point of view, I think there's 4, but I just want to jump into the 4 types for the purpose of saving time. And if there are questions, I'll come back to it. But the way we thought about this in Toyota is, okay, you have a standard. Whatever your job is, that standard is expected to be made clear to you, whether it's a delivery standard, a productivity standard, a quality standard, a cost standard, or whatever you do, there should be some standard that reflects your performance. And the dictionary definition that I'm using is a basis for comparison. Okay? Standard is a basis for comparison. And you have to evaluate yourself versus that standard when you're performing any type of service or work. Okay? And it's very simple then. If you're below the standard, you have a problem. And I break that into 2 types. Some people say there's only 1, but I strongly believe there's 2. You have to at least consider 2. And I've put them in the colors of red and yellow. Okay, red being the worst, when we have to troubleshoot temporarily for speed reasons. And then the more traditional gap from standard, which takes longer and goes after the true root cause. But sometimes you have to do both. And sometimes, sadly, you have to start with number 1. So I'm going to build this bottom up. I could go top down, but I will build it bottom up today, starting with number 1 and good troubleshooting. Okay, I don't mean bad troubleshooting, like a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. I mean really, really good problem solving that many industries practice, and I know you do here. Okay? So a couple pictures just to show other industries and what I mean. This is sad art. 1 year ago, I was coming here to Brazil, and I woke up at 4 a.m. with really bad pain in my stomach. And at 6 a.m., I went straight to ER. I went to the hospital and ER. I couldn't stand up. The pain was so bad. And my father had this condition, so I kind of suspected what it was. It was an inflammation in my colon. It's called diverticulitis, diverticuli or diverticulitis. Okay? And I get food and bacteria in these pockets trapped. And if it doesn't self-clean the way it's supposed to, it gets extremely inflamed and painful. And I thought I was dying. I mean, I cannot explain the pain. Terrible. I missed my flight. I did, and the organizers panicked. So I came out of the conference, but I was late. The good news is with diverticulitis, they don't really know the root cause, but they can treat it. So the doctor said, well, I'll give you a shot for the pain. I'll give you antibiotics. And you have to stay here 2 hours. And in 2 hours, I felt better. The pain really went down, the pain pill and the antibiotics. And he says, I will let you go to Brazil, but you must take these antibiotics for 5 to 7 days. And just in case, here's 3 more pain pills. And got on the airplane, the next flight, got to Brazil, went to the conference, and everything was okay. But I asked the doctor, what's the root cause? He says, I can't tell you. We don't really know. I would have to open you up and remove this and slice it out and try and scientifically study and say why. Was it a food particle? Was it bacteria? Was it some other condition? It triggers in people with different diets, different sizes. It's not related with me with a certain dietary thing or food. My health is relatively good, but I'm suspect to repeat cases of this, unfortunately. But we can troubleshoot it. The good news is we can troubleshoot it. Thank God. Another just general example, kind of for laughter. I mean, house is on fire. What do? You call the firefighters. Please put out my fire. What if the firefighters drove up, said, okay, team, come over here, huddle up. I've got a clipboard. Let's discuss the root cause. Let's brainstorm why this fire started. I want to discuss root causes with you. Mom, what do you think? You know, kids, what do you think? Neighbors, what do you think? You know, no, the house is burning. The house is burning. Save my house. Later, step 2, we will go into root cause investigation of why the fire started. Okay, so sometimes you must do 1, troubleshooting, and 2, firefighting, and the root cause after that. Even in the software world, I think you have to sometimes troubleshoot things, right? Here's a temporary patch. The code, the bug. Here's a temporary fix. I will send you the permanent fix next week. You know, there's a 1-step, 2-step like this sometimes. You know, Yahoo, for example, they had a serious data breach. 2 billion people, their email accounts hacked. I was one of them. Okay. Still can't say, poor Marissa Meyer, very wonderful, intelligent lady. I know a friend of hers. I do not know her personally, but she had to go in front of Congress and testify and kind of say, I'm sorry, but had to admit they don't know how the hack happened. At least at that point in time, they couldn't say the root cause of why it happened. But they did troubleshoot it. Maybe not fast enough, maybe not well enough, but they did, you know, make everybody change their password, 2-factor authentication, add additional firewalls and levels of defense that seemingly stopped it from happening again. But, you know, sometimes you're forced to troubleshoot. You don't choose to troubleshoot always. Sometimes you're forced to because of the time. Another famous example is Apollo 13. I use this because it was a movie. Most people remember Tom Hanks and the situation. And it has this famous statement, Houston, we have a problem. And they did. An oxygen tank ruptured, kind of like, in TV, they made it explode. I think in reality, it wasn't a big explosion, it was a rupture, but still a serious problem. And they were going to lose power and oxygen and a lot of things in 3 hours. So the movie says, Houston, we have a problem. And they said it was a fine hour of problem solving. I think it was 72 hours. But they actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things that I count, by my count, they had 8 things they did by troubleshooting to kind of safely get back to Earth over that 72-hour period. It was not one thing. It was a series of things they had to do and do and do to survive and get home safely. And then a couple months after the mission, with investigation, they did find out that an incorrect thermostat relay had been installed with the wrong voltage, and that is the most probable root cause. Of course, it burned up in space on re-entry, so could not examine it. But as they analyzed the drawings and the system and what most likely transpired, it was an incorrect component installed due to a design change. So even NASA troubleshoots, okay? I work at national laboratories, guess what? We troubleshoot quite a lot. It's not the best style of problem solving, but sometimes it's necessary. And even in the lean world, at least in Toyota, okay? Now, I can't talk for other companies, but in Toyota, we did a lot of this, and we considered it our most basic form of problem solving. Technically, in Japanese, for those who care, they called it ijo shochi, which is abnormality handling, abnormality management, abnormality handling. So it's like if you got a bug, you deal with it. If you got a fault in the controller, you deal with it. If you got a conveyor that jams, you deal with it. You got a faulty part, you quickly deal with it. And Toyota expected all employees, 100% of employees, to do this, office-based or production-based. The idea is a problem happens, you are trained to handle it as rapidly as possible in the minute. And if you can't, your team defaults to helping you. If your team can't resolve it, it goes to the supervisor and it escalates. There's an escalation chain with time protocols for who gets called when. And they problem solve very effectively and very rapidly on the small things. I'm not talking about the major system crashes but the small things that happen, small errors, small abnormalities that happen during a day, they're excellent at handling these. And by at least one estimation in a Toyota vehicle facility, there are 10,000 of these small, we call them and-on calls. This is an and-on, it's a digital system. When you have a problem, you can make the light come on. Every employee can do that. There's about 10,000 of these calls in a 24-hour period. So you have to handle those quickly. If you can't solve them in 1, 2, or 3 minutes, you're going to have a huge amount of downtime. And this is one reason why Toyota was able to catch up in terms of productivity with the West. They became very, very adept at the work team level, employee, and the team level and supervisor level of handling the vast majority of these by themselves within the work team very rapidly. And I tell everybody that you have your version of doing this wherever you're at, on a scale of 1 to 10. I just want you to improve. If you think you're a 5 out of 10, please become a 7. If you think you're a 6 out of 10, please become an 8. If you think you're an 8 out of 10, please become a 10. If you think you're a 9 out of 10, please become an 11. You're just trying to improve the ability of everyone in the organization. And it's easier with parts. I know it's different in your world, and I can't even imagine some of the situations that people on the webinar might be facing, but we try and highlight all these abnormalities on team boards, on pieces of paper, and even digital displays in many cases, and employ what I call the 4C thinking pattern. What's the concern? Why did the fault or concern condition happen? What's the cause of that to the deepest extent you can find? In a time-sensitive case, what's the immediate countermeasure we can do? And then how do we check up? How does the next level of supervision check up on that as rapidly as possible? You'll see this style of quick, what I call 4C thinking on many forms of paperwork. This is one example here. Or if I go back, you'll see them on boards. This is a cartoon example, but a real board would have the problem, the cause, and the countermeasure written a little more deliberately. I'll show you one of my examples in a few minutes. And this spirit of 4Cs and rapid problem solving needs to be practiced. A lot of organizations say we're already great at this, but we're not as great as we often think we are. A famous man behind this was a gentleman who was the startup plant manager where I worked in the 65. I was not there when he was, but he practiced something called the 3 Gs and the 5 Ys in this spirit of rapid problem solving. He said the key for anyone is to go and see, get the facts and grasp the situation. So 3 Gs, go and see, get the facts, grasp the situation. In English and Japanese, they conveniently all have, Gs with them. He also said, practice the 5 Ys. Don't stop at the first why. If somebody gives you an explanation of why something happened, sometimes you need to drill down and get more specific. And his example that was put in the textbook for many years was this one. A machine stopped. Why? Because it overloaded and blew a fuse. Why was there an overload condition? Well, this bearing, this rotating device, was not sufficiently lubricated. Why was it not lubricated? Well, the pump wasn't drawing up enough lubrication oil. So why was that happening? The shaft of the pump was worn out. Why was the shaft worn out? Well, no strainer on it, no protection strainer. Okay. So medical particles could go all the way through the system and cause this to stop working. So he says, okay, we'll stop at that why. Because if we put the strainer on, this should prevent it from reoccurring. Now, we can drill deeper. There actually are more whys to this and better ways to solve the problem. And I talk about in the book if you're interested. But at least here, I can stop the problem today from reoccurring by putting on a strainer or some protective type of filter. And that's what they're looking for in Toyota in many cases. Try and get back to standard as fast as possible in a type 1 case. Okay. Now, I said, here's a client example. I make them practice. This happens to be machines, and they use magnets to indicate red or green, and if there's a problem. And if it's red, it's beyond the allowable standard, and anytime there's a red condition, they're going to have to write the 4C out and report it. They report in the morning, they report at the end of the day. And we practice how well we write these 4Cs if we really understand the cause and how quickly we close them. And they told me up front that we're great at these. We always get the fifth why, we think, and we finish everything in one day. And it was the exact opposite. When they actually write them out and grade themselves, not me grading them, grading themselves, they said, okay, we're not that great. It's taking 3 days. And we're maybe understanding the first or second level why. We're not understanding the third, fourth, or fifth level why. And it's just a part of a skill building, like muscle, memories. Memory has muscle, brains have muscle for problem solving, and you have to exercise that skill. Work out the skill of doing this on a daily basis if you want to improve. Another client example from Canada, and again, it's production. Sorry, I don't have the digital example or a software example for you, but this is my friend Dave and Richard, and this is Dave's sad face because Dave has been a long-time employee and a very good worker and viewed as a great troubleshooter. But when we started on the team board displaying red or green, how's the shift performing? And at the end of shift saying, okay, if we missed shipments or missed delivery or had a quality problem or had a serious downtime issue, okay, he has to fill out a 4C card. Again, it's a little magnetic card. They're just put down here at the bottom. Okay, that was their analog way of doing this to start. And he has to talk through the 4Cs. And again, early on, they said, we're great at this. We solve everything in one day. And we understand the fifth level why. And when they review them daily, they find out, okay, it's taking 3 days. We don't understand the right level why. And we're not as good at handling these as we thought. We're not terrible. We're just not as good as we thought. So I encourage people to, take that concept in your world and how might you export it and try it? Because when you actually write out the 4Cs and see how many per day you solve, how well you solve them, it's usually eye-opening in some regard. Now the truth is, that's not good problem solving. It's okay. It's a starting point. And if I have 1,000 employees, I want 1,000 capable of doing type 1 troubleshooting. But real problem solving kind of starts after that. I call type 2, gap from standard. And the majority of that S curve chart I showed you, it's full of things that were invented for the purpose of type 2 problem solving. Gap from standard, deeper dives, analytical, quantitative, searching for cause and effect, root cause analysis, a system of checks to do things. And you can still have boards with these to track performance, but usually for the more complex problems, we have a gap and we can't answer why, and it's continuing over time. Troubleshooting's not working. Then we say, okay, it's type 2. It's in Toyota language, this would be an A3 report, or they call it now a 8-step Toyota practical problem solving activity, for example. But we're going to do something to close this gap and work on it until we understand the root cause and fix it. In type 1s, sometimes you say, okay, I don't have the root cause, but like with Art's diverticulitis, I can fix you for now. And we'll accept that risk. In type 2s, it's serious enough. They say, I'm elevating it for safety, for quality, for whatever reason, importance to your customer. We're going to figure this out. The time doesn't matter. 1 day, 5 days, weeks, we will solve this and get to the root cause. And you have to have some style of this. And every organization does, but again, you want to develop more. Okay, if I have 1,000 people, ideally I do want 1,000 type 2 problem solvers, but not even in Toyota is that level quite achieved. Okay. Almost every type 2 pattern employs some kind of converging funneling routine that seeks to clarify and understand the real problem, study the way work is done, analyze it, scrutinize it, go through the why, logic analysis, or using statistics in many cases, studying it more deeply, more quantitatively, getting to that elusive sense of a root cause, countermeasures that will fix it, and then of course the checks and balances and the follow-up to make sure it's really works. Okay? It's a deep emphasis on step by step and getting back to where we need to be. And the famous examples of this were what I wrote about in my book, over 10 years ago, called A3 thinking. They would depict these visually, that words are not enough. With troubleshooting, you can just use words in many cases. Just talk it through, or simple scribbles. But with the hard type 2s, you have to write it down, to be honest. The steps are confusing. The data matters. The logic matters. The fishbone or the statistical analysis has to be shown. And then we can think about it together more clearly. And even then, you don't know until you test it. The real proof in an A3 is I have action items, and then I measure whether they had any effect or not. And if this trend goes down to the standard or desired line, you're going the right direction. If it doesn't go down, we haven't figured it out. So it's kind of a truth-telling game. You study it, get to root cause insights, implement corrective actions, and then verify it to see if it's really true or not. And if it works, what do you need to do to sustain it? Sounds simple. It's one of the harder things to do in many cases. Many types of problems are very difficult. Now, there can be easy type 2s. There can be medium and very complex type 2s. The easier ones we do solve with logic, 5Y, fishbone type diagrams. Some of the mediums require statistics, one variable at a time, statistical control charts. The hard ones require more advanced statistical routines, design of experiments, and more complex things. But every environment's different. Even easy problems in the national laboratory, we thought, wound up being some of the most complex. And sometimes we've had really hard, challenging problems, and after the analysis, it was actually pretty simple. So you don't know until you dive into these. If you're good at 1 and 2, you're going to be a pretty good organization. There are not many organizations around the world that are great at 1 and 2, okay? Because it takes skill. And when I mean great at it, I don't mean 1 or 2 individuals or 10 individuals who are good at it in my company. I mean the majority. Do you have the vast majority good at 1 and 2? And that's pretty hard, the bigger the organization. But even if you do, that's not enough in today's age. I'll talk about 2 examples later. But Toyota realized by the 1970s that we're catching up to the West, but catching up's not good enough. We need to go farther. We need to go a step beyond that. So type 1 and 2 routines are critical thinking, and kind of what I call looking backwards. Type 3 is raising the bar, next level of performance, incrementally. Okay? Doesn't have to be big. Type 3s can be small, they can be big. But if you're below this line, red, problem. Okay, I'll call it a type 2 in this case. But I want to be better. Competition's moving. Everybody's getting faster. Everybody's getting better. So you must improve. And the bottom case in Japanese is called mondai kaiketsu, or specifically problem solving with critical thinking. Okay? Cause and effect, critical thinking. Type 3 is called kaizen. Technically, it's called kaizen methods in Japanese. It involves creative thinking. There doesn't have to be a root cause up here. There can be causes, but not a root cause. So this room, imagine we have a standard for light. And it's we realize it's a little dark. And we see, these lights are burned out. Okay, that's the root cause. We fix this one light that's burned out. But if you decide as a group that we want this room to be brighter, how do we make this room brighter? Well, more lights, different style of light, more output for the lights. I can paint the floor white, paint the walls white, add a skylight, windows, right? What's the root cause? There isn't one. You can have 8 good ideas, 7 or 8 good ideas, and say we're going to implement 3 of them, and it makes the room brighter. That's the difference between 2 and 3. Most companies put them together and say it's the same thing. But actually the part of the brain employed is different. This is the critical side, this is the creative side. and you have to be careful you don't confuse the two. The type 3 is also more challenging, I believe, because it asks you to think about the future. The past is visible. I have data for yesterday, last week, last month. I saw it. I have the data. But the future is what you make it. You shape the future. You decide what it is. So through creativity and decisions and how you spend your time and resources, you can organize a better future state, a better type 3. How you do that depends, every environment. But it's creative-based thinking instead of critical. You can do that by a simple technique as simple as value stream mapping or process mapping or studying the flow of work. Often you have to do that with Post-it notes or Gantt charts or process mapping, and now make the work visible. Because a lot of work, especially computer-based work, is invisible. You can't always see the problem. But if you draw it out, map it out some way, you start to see wastes or see opportunities. You can challenge yourself about how to think about it. And yes, there might be type 2 and type 3 problems in there, but you can get some ideas of waste, inefficiency, delays, and start the creative side of the brain. How can we do it differently? The most famous example, I think, in Toyota, or impressive one, is what was called stamping press time reduction. That after World War II, the average time to change one of these stamping dies, and these things are heavy, humongous, okay? The tonnage is insane. It would take 4 hours to change these. So you didn't want to change them because it was heavy, complex, difficult work. In the entire world, United States, Germany, Japanese, everywhere, was at about a 4 or 5 hour average at that point in time. And the Germans and the Americans accepted the standard. Doing type 1 and type 2 problem solving, I would assume, but they accepted the standard and left it there. And what Toyota did, and many Japanese company did, was over a 20-year period, they took it down to 15 minutes by 1962. And then in 1973, they got it down to 3 minutes. At that point, there's diminishing returns. There's little benefit to get much faster. But one company is still wasting 4 or 5 hours a day. This company's got that entire 5 hours to use productively towards something else. And when you start doing this across hundreds of machines and dozens of facilities, it does add up as a factor productivity advantage. It's like compound interest. You think, well, 1 minute, what's 1 minute? What's 5 minutes? But year over year, if you do that and the competition doesn't, that compound interest can really over time add up. So my joke is to you, what's compound interest in your work? What's the setup reduction thing in your work? What's the angle that would increase productivity and make it easier to change over? Higher levels of productivity, less downtime, right the first time, making the part right the first time. Okay. The fourth type is similar to 3, and again, like 1 and 2 are related, 3 and 4 are related, but there's a time difference. With 3 and 1, I'm saying that it's got to be faster. Okay. With 2 and 4, I'm saying the quality of the answer has to be better. On 1 and 3, I'm emphasizing time and speed a bit more. On 2 and 4, I'm saying forget about the time, get the answer right. And that's why I break 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 apart. Okay, I'll accept a fast answer that works for now if I can get to 2. In 3, I'll accept a Kaizen or improvement, but I also have to keep thinking about what is a superior, innovative answer for the long term. Open-ended thinking, a radical breakthrough. Because I started 1, 2, 3, and 4, in real life, 4 starts first, and 4 is the most important in today's economy in particular. You have to have the innovator, the designer, the developer. That person has to make something first, whether it's a car or a computer program or a chair or this clicker. You have to have the innovator first, and then the company grows. Then with growth comes type 1, type 2, and type 3 problems, ultimately. But you have to have 4 first. And the scary thing is, using the automotive industry as an example, GM was top of the food chain, top of the pyramid in the 1950s up till the 70s. And what's happened over a 50-year period is they've lost market share. Up and down with quality, up and down with profits, but steadily lost market share. Number one in the world, by far, in a 50-year decline. Toyota was nothing. Toyota was almost bankrupt in 1951. No worldwide market share, 0.01%. It would be irrelevant. And over a 50-year period, they've grown to be number one in their industry. Not to the percentage that GM had. Nobody will, because you got the Koreans, you got the Chinese, you got the Europeans, everybody's growing. But Toyota's now won, but it wasn't an overnight story. It was the heroic 50-year consistency of purpose thing. Companies today don't have that long. That time in that era, you could see that long, slow decline occur. But today, think about the iPhone and Nokia. Right? Nokia had over 50% market share in 2007. Stephen Jobs stood up at a conference and introduced the iPhone to the world. This is a Google Pixel phone. My wife is iPhone. And everybody knew, well, that's something different. That's something neat. The graphical user interface. This looks superior. And over a 5-year period, Nokia became irrelevant. Apple took off. And copycats, follow Apple going that way. And Nokia is now kind of a famous case study in how to fail, how to be a market leader and fail in 5 years. And this was what scares me about our industry, our time, that we could all be failure in 5 years. What would disrupt you? That's what scares me. What would disrupt any of my clients? You have to be thinking that potential exists in the industry, even if you don't see it, the potential exists. I mean, it happened with Blockbuster Video by Netflix. It happened to retail stores with Amazon. You don't always see it coming. The change of pace today is so rapid. You have to actively be looking outward, scanning the horizon with the Type 4 even better than we did in the past. The leading frameworks for open-ended and innovation style thinking are probably the design thinking school out of the Stanford Design School. Lean startup, popularized in a lot of startup incubator facilities by Eric Ries. Toyota uses something called set-based design. And there is an interesting Russian model. They call it TREES, but it stands for theory. If you translate it into English, it's theory of inventive problem solving. So TIPS is the acronym. But it's again, a interesting way to solve problems and innovate more rapidly is the idea. All of them are good. I recommend my clients study all of them, invest people and resources and time in learning all of them, and train yourself. Just like you have to train Type 1, train Type 2, train Type 3 thinking, you want to train Type 4 thinking, because you never know where the next brilliant idea might come from. It's often by looking outside. It's not looking inside at our computers, on our daily thing. It's scanning the outside world and see what's changing, what technology is doing, and how that might apply to my job someday. But you don't know. So Toyota's had a very lucky 50, 70-year period, and good and lucky, but nobody knows the future. I spoke with the Toyota gentleman at the conference yesterday, and they're confident that no matter what the economy and the markets choose, that they're okay. They can compete with gasoline engines. They can switch to diesel. They've got hybrid. They've got electric now developed, and they've got hydrogen vehicles. And I don't know which way the market will go, but if one of those fives takes over, they can move in all 5 of those directions. They have innovation at play in all those 5 areas, along with AI and other things at work. And sometimes you have to do that. You got to have multiple options to pursue. Don't be stuck with one if the market changes. The funny thing is, though, most of these frameworks are product-based, and this is my concern, that they're okay, they're good, nothing wrong with them. Wish I had invented them. Forward, please. This one is a little different. Oh, I'm on a different slide here to there. Can we go back? Can we? Okay, here's where I want to be. Now we match again. Okay, this one takes innovation and says different parts of your business. Don't think product for a second. How do you make a profit? How do you connect with others? What's the structure of your business? What are your processes? What's your product performance or product system performance? What's your service? What's your channel? What's your brand? What's your customer engagement strategy? And how do you compete on all those levers? You don't have to be great at all 10. You can be outstanding at 1 or 2 and be the leader in your industry. And the book is called 10 Areas of Innovation and Breakthrough Thinking. And they give examples of multiple companies succeeding, doing it different ways. And I think it's, again, for study purposes, I think it's good to look about and think about, and how does their answers compare to what you're doing? Does it offer any ways of potentially doing it differently? Because innovation is possible by area and not just on a product basis. And I've talked with people and executives from these companies, and even though they're ranked as good at innovation, they still have type 1, type 2, and type 3 problems they're working on as well. So the world is moving fast. Think, again, your value, your purpose, your place in the market, the chain you're supplying. What are you really doing that matters to the customer? What problem are you trying to solve at all levels? And what type of strategy, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 works? I want you to juggle all 4. Okay? It's a tough challenge. Juggling 1's not bad. 2, okay. 3, I can do. 4 balls is hard. But I'm afraid that that's the industry and space we're headed towards. So get in front of the competition, be good at all 4 types. Okay. With that, I will stop 40 minutes, 41 minutes, 42 minutes, and see if there's any questions or comments or just reactions.
Can we spend more 5 minutes trying to answer a few questions?
Yes, I can, absolutely.
Se alguém tiver alguma pergunta e quiser fazer em português, pode fazer que a gente traduz. Ou se quiser fazer em inglês, I have a question.
Yeah.
Have you seen the kind of company who eliminates completely the type 1, or it's unavailable?
It's impossible. Toyota has it. It just, small problems are always going to occur. It's like, is there perfect code? Can you write perfect code? And the answer is no. My wife's in software for Boeing and satellite. There never is perfect code, but you can debug it to an extent where it's safe to handle the next process. And inside the factory is like that. You're always going to have minor downtime, delays, missing information, small problems. And one area of competitiveness is how fast you respond and how well you take care of those. But no, you'll never eliminate type. In my opinion, you'll never eliminate type 1s, just like there'll never be perfect code.
It's not a maturity, it's connected with
I think it's just reality. Yes, yeah. The humans involved. There's potential for error and handoffs and trade-offs. That it's an impossible thing. Okay.
Do you agree with this affirmation? Fall in love with the problem, not the solution?
I like the quote. Yeah. He invented Waze, right? Uri Levine was the name. He has this nice shirt. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And we are guilty of 2 things, I think. I'm going to remake his shirt. Don't fall in love with one problem-solving approach, and don't fall in love with your answer. Love the problem. And I personally believe you can look at every problem from 4 angles, the 4 I described, maybe more. But if I'm facing any situation for my own personal training, I try and think, okay, right now, how do we resolve this safely? Secondly, how do we pursue the root cause, whether it's tomorrow or next week? Today's better, but okay, worst case tomorrow. 3, how could we do this better? That was painful. I don't want to suffer through that again. 4, how would you do this entirely differently? That is superior solution space, more value to the customer, easier for me, eliminates whatever the complexity or difficulty was. I like to practice thinking problems, every problem from those 4 directions for mental agility, if you will. Okay.
Boa noite. Boa noite, meu nome é Eduardo. Hoje nós trabalhamos numa empresa prestadora de serviço, temos vários clientes com diversos, várias demandas nível 1 e nível 2. Então, eu acredito que ainda somos um pouco reativos. Sua recomendação seria a criação de uma célula de inovação dentro da empresa para que nós pudéssemos, então, startar os nossos processos a partir do nível 4. Seria isso uma célula de inovação. Estou certo?
It's actually a very good question. Historically, for 100 years, this has actually been debated. If you go back to old industrial engineering and operational research textbooks, there's one school of thought that says standardize your process. Whatever it is, standardize it, then improve it. But some processes are screwed up, right? It's too hard, it's complex, it's got chaos in it. And sometimes it's better to improve it and simplify it first, then standardize it. And you know, and different experts have said completely contradictory things on this topic. And personally, if I don't see it, I don't know, I have a hard time even having an opinion. But I would try and, as an exercise, you know, track some kind of team board, make ourselves write out the type 1 problems and see how well we can explain them in the 4 C's and if we can resolve them. And maybe we're already very good at it. But also then say which of those are probably type 2s and would need to be handled better. What's a type 3? And what would be the exercise? What would be a type 4? I would do some type of exercise as a team, thinking all 4 of those levels, and then discussing, okay, what's our play? Got to be good at all 4 types. But first, is it the type 1 and type 2 standardizing first and then trying to improve? Or is it the opposite case, which people have argued, improve first, get the junk out of the way, get the good process, and then standardize and improve after that? It's like that, you know, the Chinese yin and yang symbol, you know, without standards, there is no improvement. Without improvement, you know, you must improve and create the next standard for the next improvement to occur. They're interrelated, but which comes first can always be a debate, I'm afraid. Sorry, not a good answer, maybe, but okay. Chinese fortune cookie wisdom.
There is one more online from Luciana.
Okay.
We are trying to use the concepts and sometimes we mix up type of problem with type of solution. Can we solve a type 2 problem with type 3 or type 4 for tools? Could you please comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's possible. I would need to know the specifics, but that's why I say think about it. Every problem, think about it as a 1, 2, 3, and a 4. And then time and situation dictates how you go. Type 4s generally take longer. In automotive, type 4 is going to take long, right? It took Elon Musk a long time to make the Tesla car, right, and compete. It takes a long time in analog and heavy tech industries to do things. But in digital space, you can do it much faster. You could make a type 4 a lot more rapidly, potentially. So if you have a problem, I do encourage people to think about it. Okay, what is the type 1 answer that we can do now? And is that smart play? What is the type 2 process? What's the root cause? How do we get to it? How long would that take? What would it cost? What's the type 3? Type 3s and type 4s are more likely to cost some money sometimes. You want creativity first, not capital. But how fast can I get to a 3 or 4? And if I can get to a 4, a 3 or a 4 fast, inexpensively, it's better than a 2. So it's a difficult question without knowing the specifics. You have to evaluate the time, the cost, the complexity, the risk, and say, okay, what's our play? What's our first step? What's our second step? But it could be a 1, then a 3, could be a 2, then a 4. Maybe just brainstorming, you have a 4 solution tomorrow. That's pretty hard, but if it's possible, you know, I would try that.
Art, thank you very much.
Okay.
Congratulations for your explanation. Please, applause for Art.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you.